Imagine Sofia, radiant in her ancestral Portuguese gown, about to vow eternal love, only to uncover her groom's brutal group chat mocking her as his ugly bride and plotting a money-grab divorce. What she reveals at the altar will leave you reeling.
Thank you, Eliza, for this chance to share. I'm Sofia, and after that betrayal, I transformed pain into power. Now I'm here to show how I fought back and reclaimed my story. My name is Sofia, and I thought I was living in a fairy tale. At 29, with my dark chestnut hair that my grandmother taught me to braid in the traditional Portuguese style, I believed I had found my prince. Alex Martinez seemed like everything I had ever wanted, charming, ambitious, and completely devoted to me. Or so I thought. We met 3 years ago at a charity gala in San Francisco, where I was representing my family's construction business. My parents, Maria and Carlos Oliveira, had built their company from nothing after immigrating from Portugal in the 1980s. They sacrificed everything to give me opportunities they never had, working 16-hour days to build a multi-million-dollar empire. That night, in my emerald green dress that brought out my brown eyes, I felt like I belonged in Alex's world of tech executives and venture capitalists. Alex was magnetic. He swept me off my feet with weekend trips to Napa, surprise deliveries of my favorite Portuguese pastéis de nata, and long conversations about our future together. He seemed genuinely interested in my culture, asking about my family's traditions and encouraging me to teach him Portuguese phrases. Though looking back, his pronunciation was always deliberately terrible, as if he found our language amusing rather than beautiful. When he proposed on the beach in Half Moon Bay, recreating our first date, I cried tears of pure joy. The engagement period was a whirlwind of planning and excitement. Alex insisted on a grand wedding, 400 guests at the prestigious Chateau do Churro in the Sierra Nevada foothills, with a price tag that made even my successful parents wince: $500,000. Sofia deserves nothing but the best, he would tell people, his arm around my waist, though I noticed he never offered to contribute to the astronomical cost. My parents were thrilled to pay for their only daughter's dream wedding despite the financial strain. "Money is just paper," my father would say in his accented English, while I spoke with the crisp, unaccented American English I'd perfected in business school. "Your happiness is worth everything we have." But looking back now, I realized there were signs. Subtle things that my love-drunk mind dismissed as wedding stress or personality quirks. Alex's friends, particularly his best man Leo Chen, would share looks I couldn't decipher. They'd stop talking when I entered rooms, claiming they were discussing boring work stuff. Alex would laugh at jokes I didn't understand, then wave off my confusion with a kiss on my forehead and a patronizing smile that I mistook for affection. There was the time at his company's holiday party when I overheard Leo say something about Alex's long-term investment strategy while looking directly at me. But when I asked about it later, Alex claimed Leo was talking about his stock portfolio. Or when his groomsman Chris made a comment about my exotic features that felt less like a compliment and more like he was describing an artifact in a museum. Alex would always smooth things over, explaining that his friends were just awkward around women or had weird senses of humor. The most troubling incident happened 6 months before our wedding. We were at dinner with his college friends, and I excused myself to use the restroom. When I returned, the entire table went silent, and I caught the tail end of someone saying, "At least the family money makes up for," before they noticed me approaching. Alex's face was flushed, and Leo was grinning like he'd just told the world's funniest joke. "What did I miss?" I asked, sliding back into my seat. "Nothing important," Alex said quickly, but the atmosphere remained tense for the rest of the evening, and I noticed how his friends kept stealing glances at me and smirking. I started noticing other things too. How Alex's phone was always face down when I was around, and how he developed a habit of tilting the screen away from me even when we were watching movies together. How he'd step away to take calls from the guys, always moving to another room and speaking in hushed tones. How he'd sometimes look at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, not love, not desire, but something calculating, like he was appraising my value. When I brought up my concerns, he'd reassure me with elaborate gestures that now seemed designed to distract rather than comfort. Flowers, jewelry, romantic dinners at expensive restaurants where he'd make a show of ordering in broken Portuguese to impress me, though I suspected he was actually mocking the language. "You're just nervous about the wedding," he'd say whenever I questioned anything. "It's normal to overthink everything. That's why I love you. You care so much about making everything perfect." My mother noticed my growing anxiety during one of our wedding planning sessions. "Filha," she said one evening as we reviewed seating charts in her kitchen, surrounded by samples of Portuguese lace and American silk, "you seem troubled. Are you having second thoughts?" I looked at her weathered hands, marked by decades of hard work building the American dream, and felt guilty for even entertaining doubts. "I'm just tired, me. Planning a wedding is exhausting, especially one this size." She studied my face with the intensity that only mothers possess, switching to Portuguese as she always did when the conversation turned serious. "Marriage is not just about love, Sofia. It's about respect. Make sure he respects you, not just what our family can give him." Her words haunted me, but I pushed them aside. Alex loved me. He had to. Why else would he want to marry me? Why else would he spend 3 years building a life with me? I convinced myself that my insecurities were just pre-wedding jitters, amplified by the pressure of organizing such an elaborate celebration that would showcase both Portuguese traditions and American elegance. The week before our wedding, Alex seemed different. More distant, more distracted. His phone buzzed constantly with messages that would make him smirk before quickly deleting them. He claimed it was work stress, but he'd never been secretive about his job before. When I jokingly asked if he was planning a surprise, he laughed too loudly and said, "You know I'm terrible at keeping secrets from you." That should have been my first clue that everything I believed about our relationship was built on the biggest secret of all. October 15th dawned crisp and golden, the kind of perfect autumn day that wedding planners dream about. The morning air carried the scent of pine and the promise of a celebration that had been 2 years in the planning. I woke up in the bridal suite at Château do Churau, surrounded by my closest friends and family members who had traveled from across the country, and some from across the ocean, to witness what they believed would be the happiest day of my life. My maid of honor, Isabella, my cousin who had flown in from Boston, was already bustling around the room, checking details off her meticulously organized list. "Sofia, the hair and makeup team will be here in an hour," she announced, her Portuguese accent still thick despite 20 years in America, a reminder of the cultural heritage that Alex claimed to love so much. "Your dress is steamed and perfect, and your grandmother's jewelry is laid out and ready." I sat up in bed, my dark chestnut hair loose around my shoulders, and tried to summon the excitement I knew I should be feeling. Instead, there was a knot in my stomach that had been growing tighter for weeks, a persistent anxiety that felt different from normal pre-wedding nerves. "Bella," I said quietly, "do you think I'm making the right choice?" She paused in her organizing and sat on the edge of my bed, taking my hands in hers. "What do you mean, Prima? You love Alex, he loves you. You're perfect together." Her certainty should have been comforting, but it only made the doubt gnaw deeper. "Are we, though?" I asked, voicing the fear that had been growing stronger each day. "Sometimes I feel like I don't really know him, like there's this whole part of his life that I'm not part of, this whole version of himself that he only shows to his friends." Isabella squeezed my hands. "All men have their secrets, Sofia. It doesn't mean they don't love us. Look at how much he's invested in this wedding, in your future together. Actions speak louder than words." She was right about the investment, though I was beginning to realize that all the investment had come from my family, not his. Alex had been involved in every detail of the wedding planning, from the menu selection featuring both Portuguese specialties and American favorites, to the choice of linens that would complement the vineyard setting. He'd insisted on the most expensive photographer, the most exclusive venue, the most elaborate floral arrangements featuring white roses and eucalyptus, a combination that cost more per centerpiece than most people spent on their entire wedding flowers. "Only the best for my beautiful bride," he'd say whenever I questioned the costs, though he never offered to help cover any of them. The wedding party began arriving as the morning progressed. My bridesmaids, a mix of college friends, cousins, and work colleagues, filled the suite with laughter and champagne, their dusty rose gowns hanging like a garden of silk flowers around the room. My mother appeared with a tray of Portuguese sweet bread and coffee, her eyes already misty with emotion. "Minha filha bonita," she whispered, kissing my cheek and leaving the faint scent of her familiar perfume mixed with the traditional rosewater she always wore on special occasions. "Your father is so proud." "We both are." The hair and makeup team worked their magic, transforming me into a vision that seemed almost too perfect to be real. My hair was woven into the intricate Portuguese braid that had been passed down through generations of women in my family, a complex pattern that told the story of love, commitment, and the binding of two families. Each twist and turn represented a prayer for happiness, a blessing for fertility, a hope for prosperity. My makeup was flawless but natural, enhancing my brown eyes and olive complexion without masking the features that connected me to my heritage. When it came time to put on my dress, the room fell silent with reverence. It was a masterpiece of silk and lace, custom designed by a Portuguese artist who had incorporated traditional embroidery patterns into a modern silhouette. The bodice featured delicate threadwork that told the story of my family's journey from the old country to America, while the flowing skirt represented the future I was supposed to be stepping into. As my mother and grandmother helped me into it, I felt the weight of generations of women who had worn similar dresses, who had made similar promises, who had believed in similar dreams. "You look like a queen, Philha," my mother whispered, tears streaming down her face as she fastened the tiny pearl buttons that ran up the back of the dress. "Your Avo would be so proud to see you carrying on our traditions." My grandmother, who had made the journey from Portugal despite her 91 years, pressed a small gold cross into my palm, the same cross that had been blessed by the priest in our ancestral village over a century ago. "This was your great-grandmother's," she said in Portuguese, her voice trembling with age and emotion. "It has blessed 4 generations of marriages. May it bless yours as well." I felt the weight of their expectations, their love, their sacrifices pressing down on me like a beautiful burden. This wedding wasn't just about Alex and me, it was about honoring my family's journey, celebrating their success, and continuing their legacy in this new country that had given them so much. The thought of disappointing them, of wasting their investment, was almost unbearable. As the morning progressed, I could hear the sounds of the venue coming to life below us. 400 guests were gathering, including business partners who had helped build my family's empire, extended family members who had traveled from Portugal and various corners of America, and friends from every phase of my life. The florists had transformed the grounds into a garden of white roses and eucalyptus, creating an atmosphere of timeless elegance that would have made any bride feel like royalty. Alex had texted me earlier, following the tradition of not seeing each other before the ceremony. "Can't wait to marry you today, beautiful. You're going to take my breath away. I'm the luckiest man in the world." The message should have made my heart soar, but instead, it felt hollow somehow, like words he thought he should say rather than words that came from his heart. Even through text, something felt performative about his affection. Isabella noticed my mood as she helped me into my shoes, delicate heels that had been dyed to match the exact shade of my dress. "Sofia, you're glowing, but you seem nervous. That's normal, you know. Even the most confident brides have butterflies." "It's not butterflies," I admitted, looking at myself in the full-length mirror. "It's more like doubt. What if I don't really know him as well as I think I do? What if this whole thing is a mistake?" "Cold feet," Isabella said dismissively, though I caught a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Every bride has them. Once you see him standing at that altar, once you're looking into his eyes and saying your vows, all of this anxiety will disappear." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. In just 2 hours, I would be walking down an aisle lined with 400 people who expected to witness a love story for the ages. My parents had spent more money on this single day than most people make in 5 years. Alex had taken time off work, planned a honeymoon in Portugal that would let me show him my ancestral homeland, and spent months telling everyone about his excitement to start our life together. But the doubt remained, a persistent whisper in the back of my mind that something wasn't right. I just had no idea how right that whisper was, or how dramatically my world was about to change. As the final preparations began, I caught a glimpse of myself in the full-length mirror. I looked perfect, every inch the radiant bride that everyone expected to see. The intricate braid crowned my head like a work of art, the dress fit like it had been made by angels, and my makeup created a flawless canvas that would photograph beautifully. But behind my brown eyes, I could see the uncertainty that no amount of makeup could hide. In less than 2 hours, I would discover that uncertainty was the smartest emotion I could have been feeling. The chaos of final preparations swirled around me like a beautiful tornado. Bridesmaids were getting their lipstick touched up, photographers were capturing candid moments of laughter and tears, and my mother was giving last-minute instructions to the wedding coordinator in a mixture of English and Portuguese. The energy in the bridal suite was electric, everyone feeding off the excitement of the approaching ceremony that would unite two families and two cultures in celebration. I was standing by the window, looking out at the vineyard where our guests were being seated in neat rows of white chairs, when Isabella burst through the door with a look of panic on her face. "Sofia, we have a problem," she announced, slightly out of breath. "The wedding coordinator needs your signature on the final vendor payment authorization. Apparently, there was a last-minute addition to the catering order that needs approval." I frowned, my business instincts immediately alert. What kind of addition? Alex and I finalized everything weeks ago. We went over every detail twice to make sure the menu balanced Portuguese specialties with options for guests who might not be familiar with our cuisine. "I don't know the details, but she said it's urgent. The caterers won't start service without the signed authorization." Isabella looked genuinely stressed, wringing her hands in a way that was unlike her usual composed demeanor. "She's waiting downstairs in the coordinator's office." I glanced at the clock on the antique dresser. We had 45 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle to what I hoped would be my happily ever after. Can't my father handle it? He's been dealing with all the financial arrangements, and his signature is on all the vendor contracts. "She specifically asked for your signature, something about you being listed as the primary contact on the catering contract." Isabella was already grabbing my silk robe from the chair. "It'll just take 5 minutes. I promise." Reluctantly, I threw the robe over my wedding dress, careful not to disturb the intricate beadwork or the delicate lace sleeves. I followed Isabella out of the bridal suite, my heels clicking on the polished hardwood floors of the chateau. The venue was buzzing with activity, servers setting up the reception area with crystal glasses that caught the afternoon light, musicians doing sound checks for the ceremony and reception, and guests beginning to file into the ceremony space, their voices creating a warm hum of anticipation. We made our way down a corridor I hadn't explored before, past several smaller rooms that the venue used for storage and private meetings. The walls were lined with photographs of previous weddings, hundreds of happy couples who had started their married lives in this very place. I wondered how many of them were still together, how many had found the happiness they were seeking on their wedding day. Isabella led me to a door-marked coordinator's office and knocked with the special rhythm the staff had been using all day. "Come in," called a voice from inside. But when we opened the door, the room was empty except for a few chairs and a desk covered with wedding planning materials, seating charts, vendor contracts, and timeline schedules. There was no coordinator waiting with urgent paperwork, no crisis that required my immediate attention. "That's strange," Isabella said, looking around the empty room with confusion. "She said she'd be here waiting for us." "Maybe she stepped out for a moment," I suggested, though something felt off about the entire situation. "Let's wait a few minutes and see if she comes back." As we stood there in the quiet office, I heard voices coming from the room next door. Male voices, laughing loudly about something that seemed to amuse them greatly. I recognized the sound immediately. It was Alex and his groomsmen getting ready for the ceremony. They must have been using the adjacent room as their preparation space, probably adjusting their ties and sharing pre-ceremony drinks to calm their nerves. "Sounds like the guys are having a good time," Isabella commented with a smile, though I noticed her expression was tense. "Maybe we should just go back upstairs," and I was about to respond when I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was Alex's voice, clear and unmistakable, saying, "I can't believe I'm actually going through with this charade." The things we do for money, right? Isabella and I both froze, our eyes meeting in a moment of shared shock. The voices were carrying clearly through the thin wall between the rooms, and every word was audible. "Dude, you've been complaining about her for 3 years," came another voice, Leo, Alex's best man, the man who was supposed to stand beside him as he pledged his love to me. "Why not just call it off? There are easier ways to make money than marrying someone you can't stand." "Because her parents are worth $20 million, and I've already invested too much time in this relationship to walk away empty-handed," Alex replied with a laugh that sounded nothing like the warm, loving tone he used with me. It was cold, calculating, utterly devoid of any affection. Besides, divorce courts are very generous to husbands who can prove they tried to make it work. Give it a few years, establish myself in the family business, then collect my payout. My hand flew to my mouth, and Isabella's eyes widened in horror. We were accidentally eavesdropping on a conversation that was destroying everything I thought I knew about my relationship, my future, my entire life. "But what if she finds out you don't actually love her?" asked another voice, Chris, one of the groomsmen who had always seemed slightly uncomfortable around me. "She's not smart enough to figure it out," Alex said dismissively, and the casual cruelty in his voice hit me like a physical blow. "Sofia is sweet, but she's naive. She actually believes I fell for her exotic Portuguese beauty or whatever. The truth is, she was just the right combination of wealthy family and low self-esteem. Perfect target for a long-term con." The room seemed to spin around me, and I had to grab the edge of the desk to steady myself. Isabella reached for my arm, her face pale with shock and growing anger. "Plus, her family's construction business has some very lucrative government contracts," Alex continued, his voice taking on the tone he used when discussing business deals. "Once I'm officially part of the family, I'll have access to information that could be very valuable to my tech company. It's really a perfect business merger disguised as a romance." "You're cold, man," Leo said, but he was laughing as if Alex had just told a particularly clever joke. "What about the honeymoon? You're going to have to pretend to be in love for 2 weeks in Portugal." "I'll manage," Alex replied with the confidence of someone who had been successfully deceiving people for years. "I've been pretending for 3 years. What's 2 more weeks? Besides, once we're back, I'll start working on the long-term exit strategy. Give it 2 or 3 years to establish myself in the business, maybe get her pregnant to really cement my position, then I'll find a reason to leave. Irreconcilable differences, maybe. Or I'll catch her cheating, shouldn't be hard to arrange." The cruelty in his voice was like a knife twisting in my chest. This man I had loved, trusted, and planned to spend my life with was talking about our marriage like it was a hostile corporate takeover. Every sweet moment, every romantic gesture, every declaration of love had been a calculated lie designed to manipulate me into giving him access to my family's wealth. "What about kids?" Chris asked, and I held my breath waiting for the answer. "I'll cross that bridge when I come to it," Alex said with a casual shrug I could hear in his voice. "Maybe 1 kid to really cement my position in the family business and inheritance, but I'm not planning to stick around long enough for a whole family. The kid can stay with her when I leave, I'm not the family man type." Isabella was squeezing my arm so tightly it hurt, but I barely felt it. The pain in my chest was overwhelming, a crushing weight that made it hard to breathe. 3 years of my life, all the love I had given, all the dreams I had built, all the plans we had made together, it was all based on lies. Worse than lies, it was based on a deliberate, calculated scheme to use me and discard me when I was no longer profitable. "Guys, we should probably get back to the ceremony prep," Leo said, and I could hear chairs scraping against the floor. "Can't keep the blushing bride waiting much longer. Though I have to say, Alex, I'm impressed by your commitment to this performance." They all laughed at that, the sound of their amusement at my expense echoing through the wall like a chorus of demons. I heard footsteps moving toward the door, and their voices began to fade as they moved back toward their preparation area. When we were certain they were gone, Isabella finally spoke, her voice shaking with rage and disbelief. "Sofia," she whispered, "I'm so sorry, I had no idea. None of us had any idea. That bastard has been playing all of us." I couldn't speak. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I felt like I was drowning in the reality of what I had just learned. Every memory of our relationship was now tainted, every moment of happiness revealed as a manipulation. The man waiting for me at the altar wasn't the person I thought I was marrying. He was a stranger who had been playing a 3-year-long con game with my heart, my trust, and my family's fortune. But as the initial shock began to fade, something else started to build inside me. Not just hurt, not just betrayal, but a cold, crystalline anger that burned like ice in my veins. Alex thought I was naive, stupid, easy to manipulate. He thought he could use me and my family for his own gain, then discard us when we were no longer useful. He was about to learn exactly how wrong he was about me. Isabella looked at me with a mixture of concern and determination. "Sofia," she said quietly, "I need you to do something for me." "Anything," I replied, though my voice sounded strange and distant to my own ears. "I need you to go back to the bridal suite and tell everyone that I'm handling the coordinator issue and will be ready in 20 minutes. Don't tell anyone what we just heard. Not yet. But Sofia, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to get proof," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "If I'm going to destroy Alex, I need evidence that what we heard wasn't just crude jokes between friends. I need something concrete." After Isabella reluctantly left to return to the bridal suite, I stood alone in the coordinator's office, my mind racing with possibilities. The conversation I had overheard kept replaying in my head, each cruel word cutting deeper than the last. But beneath the pain, a plan was beginning to form. I needed to see that group chat they had mentioned. I needed evidence that would leave no doubt about Alex's true intentions. I slipped out of the coordinator's office and made my way back toward the groomsmen's preparation area. The corridor was empty. Everyone was either getting ready or already taking their places for the ceremony. My silk robe whispered against the hardwood floors as I moved like a ghost through the shadow. I could hear voices coming from behind the door marked Groom's suite, but they sounded more subdued now, probably getting into their formal wear and preparing for the ceremony that would make Alex a very rich man. I pressed my ear to the door and heard Alex's voice clearly. "All right, guys, final check. Does everyone have their phones silenced? The last thing we need is the group chat notifications going off during the ceremony." My blood turned to ice. A group chat. They had been coordinating their mockery of me through a group chat, probably for months or even years. "Yeah, mine's on silent," Leo replied. "Good thing, because the notifications have been going crazy today. Everyone's been sharing their favorite memories of Sofia's fashion disasters and cultural quirks." They all laughed, and I felt sick to my stomach. Not only had Alex been lying to me for 3 years, but he and his friends had been actively mocking me behind my back, sharing cruel jokes and insults about everything from my appearance to my heritage. I heard footsteps approaching the door from inside, and I quickly moved away, ducking into an alcove just as the door opened. Chris emerged, adjusting his tie and checking his phone, and headed toward the ceremony area. The door closed behind him, but not completely. It remained slightly ajar, as if the latch hadn't quite caught. This was my chance. I waited a few moments to make sure Chris was gone, then crept back to the door and peered through the crack. I could see Alex standing in front of an ornate mirror, adjusting his bow tie with the confidence of a man who believed he was about to pull off the con of a lifetime. His phone was sitting on a nearby table, and Leo was across the room putting on his jacket. "I should probably check the group chat one more time," Alex said, reaching for his phone. "Make sure the guys aren't sharing anything too incriminating while the ceremony's going on." He picked up his phone, and as he did, I saw it clearly, a notification buzzing on his screen from Leo that read, "Can't believe he's going through with it, LOL." Alex chuckled as he opened the message thread, scrolling through what appeared to be a long conversation. "Oh man, Marcus shared that photo from Sofia's birthday party where she got cake frosting on her nose. Caption says, 'Preview of the honeymoon mess.'" Leo laughed. "Dude, you're terrible. But hey, at least you'll be rich and terrible." Alex set his phone back down on the table and walked toward the bathroom. "I'm going to splash some water on my face and then we should head out. Can't keep my beloved bride waiting. Time to give the performance of my life." As soon as Alex disappeared into the bathroom, I made my move. I slipped through the partially open door and grabbed his phone from the table. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure Leo would hear it, but he was busy with his own reflection and didn't notice me. I quickly typed in Alex's passcode, my birthday, which now seemed like the ultimate irony, and opened his messages. There it was, a group chat titled "His Ugly Bride" with Alex, Leo, Chris, and 4 other groomsmen. The most recent message was from just 10 minutes ago, and the preview showed Marcus's message. T-30 minutes until Alex becomes a married millionaire. I opened the full conversation, and what I found was worse than anything I could have imagined. Months and months of messages mocking everything about me. My appearance, my family, my personality, my dreams, my culture, my accent when I spoke Portuguese. They had shared unflattering photos of me taken without my knowledge, including some from intimate family gatherings where I had felt safe and loved. They had made bets about how long it would take Alex to get bored with me. They had joked about my family's accents and traditions, calling our Portuguese customs quaint immigrant nonsense. But the worst messages were from Alex himself. He had shared intimate details about our relationship, describing me in ways that made my skin crawl. He had complained about having to spend time with my family, mocked my career aspirations, and made cruel jokes about my body. In one particularly devastating thread from 6 months ago, he had actually asked the group for advice on how to speed up the engagement process, because he was getting tired of pretending to be interested in her boring stories about her family's construction business. I scrolled frantically through the chat history, screenshotting the most damaging messages. There were hundreds of them, going back almost to the beginning of our relationship. Alex had been documenting his deception from the start, sharing his progress in manipulating me like it was a game. One message thread from just last week made me physically nauseous. "Chris, last chance to back out, man. You sure you want to legally bind yourself to that? Alex, it's just a piece of paper. Divorce lawyers exist for a reason. I give it 3 years max before I'm free with half her family's money and insider access to their government contracts. Leo, what if she wants kids? Alex, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. Maybe one kid to really lock in my inheritance rights and make me look like a devoted family man to the courts, then I'm out. The kid can stay with her. I'm not planning to be the family man type long-term. Besides, child support is cheaper than sharing assets." Another thread from 2 months ago showed Alex sharing photos of my family's home and business, with comments about future assets and liquidation potential. He had been surveying my family's wealth like a thief casing a house, calculating exactly what he could steal from us. I was trembling with rage and disgust as I continued screenshotting evidence. This man had been planning to use me, manipulate me, potentially bring a child into the world as part of his scheme, and then abandon us both when it suited his purposes. The level of calculated cruelty was breathtaking. I quickly sent the screenshots to my own phone and email, making sure I had multiple copies of the evidence. Then I heard the bathroom door starting to open, and I slipped Alex's phone back onto the table and rushed out of the room, my heart hammering in my chest. I made it back to the alcove just as Alex emerged from the bathroom, looking refreshed and confident. Through the crack in the door, I watched him pick up his phone, check it briefly for any new messages in his cruel group chat, and then slip it into his jacket pocket. "Ready to make me a rich man?" Leo asked with a grin that now looked absolutely sinister to me. "Born ready," Alex replied, straightening his tie one final time. "Let's go get me married to a fortune." They left the room together, heading toward the ceremony area where 400 people waited to witness what they believed would be a celebration of love. They had no idea that their entire scheme had just been exposed, documented, and was about to be turned against them in the most public way possible. I waited until they were gone, then pulled out my own phone and looked at the screenshots I had taken. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Years of mockery, manipulation, and calculated cruelty, all documented in Alex's own words. I looked at my reflection in a nearby mirror. My wedding dress was still perfect, my makeup was still flawless, my intricate Portuguese braid was still elegantly arranged. I looked exactly like the naive, trusting bride Alex expected to manipulate for the next 3 years before discarding like a used tissue. He had no idea that he was about to marry his own destruction. And I was going to be the one to deliver it in front of 400 witnesses. I returned to the bridal suite with 15 minutes to spare before the ceremony, my phone heavy in my hand with the weight of the evidence I now carried. My bridesmaids were in various stages of final preparations, touching up lipstick, adjusting bouquets, and chattering nervously about the upcoming walk down the aisle. Isabella looked up as I entered, her eyes searching my face for any sign of what I was planning. Everything sorted with the coordinator. My mother asked, bustling over to adjust a fold in my dress that didn't need adjusting. Her hands were trembling slightly with emotion and excitement. "Yes, me, everything is exactly as it should be," I replied, and I meant it. For the first time in months, everything was crystal clear. My father appeared in the doorway, resplendent in his formal black suit, his eyes misty with emotion and pride. "Minha filha," he said softly, "you look like an angel. Are you ready to become a married woman?" I took his arm and squeezed it gently, feeling the strength that had built an empire from nothing. "I'm ready, Pi, more ready than I've ever been for anything in my life." The wedding party began to line up for the processional. My bridesmaids, beautiful in their dusty rose gowns, took their bouquets of white roses and baby's breath and assumed their positions. Isabella, as my maid of honor, would walk just before me. As she passed, she whispered urgently, "Sofia, are you sure about whatever you're planning?" "Trust me," I whispered back, my voice steady with newfound determination. "Just trust me." The music began, a string quartet playing the processional I had carefully selected months ago when I still believed I was marrying the love of my life. The melody was beautiful and haunting, a Portuguese folk song my grandmother had sung to me as a child, arranged for classical instruments. One by one, my bridesmaids began their walk down the aisle, their steps timed to the gentle melody that drifted through the shadeow's open doors. Through the window, I could see the ceremony space in all its glory. 400 guests were seated in neat rows of white chairs, the aisle between them scattered with rose petals that caught the afternoon light like scattered jewels. At the front, beneath an arch of white flowers and eucalyptus that had cost more than most people's cars, stood Alex. He looked handsome and nervous in his black tuxedo, the picture of an excited groom. Next to him stood Leo and the other groomsmen, all of them maintaining the facade of devoted friends supporting a joyous occasion. If I hadn't overheard their conversation, if I hadn't seen their group chat, I might have been moved by the sight. Alex did look like a man in love, his eyes fixed on the back of the aisle where I would soon appear. He had perfected the performance over 3 years of practice, and he was giving an Oscar-worthy performance even now. "It's time, Philha," my father said, offering me his arm with the same pride he had shown when I graduated from business school, when I landed my first major client, when I proved that the American dream he had worked so hard to achieve was alive and well in his daughter. I took a deep breath and stepped into the doorway. The moment I appeared, the entire congregation rose to their feet in a rustle of silk and wool. 400 pairs of eyes turned toward me, and I heard the collective intake of breath that every bride dreams of inspiring. I did look beautiful. The months of preparation, the expensive dress, the professional hair and makeup had all combined to create a vision of bridal perfection that would have made any groom's heart race with joy. But I wasn't walking toward my happily ever after. I was walking toward justice. The string quartet transitioned into the bridal march, and my father and I began our slow procession down the aisle. I smiled and nodded at familiar faces, my cousins who had traveled from Portugal specifically for this day, my college friends who had taken time off work to be here, my parents' business associates who had watched me grow up, Alex's family members who had welcomed me so warmly into their fold. All of these people had gathered to witness what they believed would be a celebration of love between two people who were perfect for each other. They were about to witness something very different. As we approached the altar, I could see Alex more clearly. His face was radiant with what looked like genuine joy and anticipation. The afternoon sun streaming through the chapel windows created a halo effect around his head that would have been romantic if I didn't know the truth about the devil standing beneath it. For a moment, I almost doubted what I had heard and seen. Could someone really be that good at pretending? Could the man who had held me when I cried, who had brought me soup when I was sick, who had proposed on the beach where we had our first date, really be the same person who had spent 3 years mocking me behind my back? But then I caught Leo's eye, and I saw something flicker there, a barely suppressed smirk, as if he was remembering their earlier conversation about Alex's performance. The doubt vanished, replaced by cold determination and righteous anger. My father and I reached the altar, and Alex stepped forward to take my hand. His touch felt different now, not warm and comforting, but calculating and false, like a salesman closing a deal. He leaned in to kiss my cheek and whispered, "You look absolutely stunning, Sofia. I'm the luckiest man alive." 3 days ago, those words would have made my heart soar. Now they made my stomach turn with revulsion. The officiant, a kind elderly man who had counseled us through our pre-marriage sessions and believed he was witnessing true love, smiled warmly at the assembled guests. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Sofia Maria Oliveira and Alexander James Martinez in holy matrimony." I barely heard the opening words of the ceremony. My mind was focused on the phone hidden in my bouquet, beneath the cascade of white roses that Alex had insisted on because they photographed better than my preferred pink peonies. The screenshots were ready. The evidence was undeniable. All I had to do was wait for the right moment. The officiant spoke about love, commitment, and the sacred bond of marriage. He talked about how Alex and I had found in each other the perfect complement, how our love had grown and deepened over the years we had been together. If only he knew how one-sided that love had been, how everything he was saying was based on a lie that had been carefully constructed and maintained for 3 years. "The couple has chosen to exchange vows they have written themselves," the officiant announced, his voice carrying clearly across the silent crowd. "These words come from their hearts, expressing the promises they wish to make to each other as they begin their married life together." This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when everything would change. "Sofia," the officiant said, turning to me with an encouraging smile, "would you like to share your vows first?" I looked out at the 400 guests, all of them watching me with expectant smiles and tears of joy in their eyes. I looked at my parents in the front row, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief embroidered with Portuguese lace, my father beaming with the pride of a man who had built an empire and was now watching his greatest achievement, his daughter, take the next step in her life. I looked at Alex's family, who had embraced me as one of their own and were about to learn the truth about the son they had raised. I looked at Alex himself, his face glowing with anticipation of the loving words I was about to speak, the final performance that would seal his access to my family's fortune. Then I reached into my bouquet and pulled out my phone. A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd like a wave. The officiant looked puzzled, and Alex's smile faltered slightly as he tried to understand what was happening. I had planned to stand here and read traditional vows, I began, my voice clear and steady thanks to the microphone clipped discreetly to my dress. Words about love, honor, and cherishing each other for the rest of our lives. Alex's confusion was turning to alarm, and I could see him trying to catch my eye, probably planning to signal me to put the phone away and get back to the script. But I realized this morning that there are other vows that need to be shared first, I continued, ignoring his growing panic. Vows that have already been made in private between Alex and his friends. The murmur from the crowd grew louder, voices mixing in confusion and growing concern. Leo had gone pale, and I could see him trying frantically to catch Alex's attention. "You see," I said, holding up my phone so everyone could see it clearly, "I discovered something very interesting today. Alex and his groomsmen have a group chat. Would you like to know what they call it?" "Sofia, stop," Alex hissed, but his voice was picked up by my microphone and broadcast to the entire congregation. "They call it his ugly bride," I announced to the stunned crowd. The gasp that rose from 400 people was audible even over the microphone system. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, and my father's face went from confusion to thunderous anger in seconds. Several guests were already pulling out their phones, sensing that they were about to witness something unprecedented. "And in this group chat," I continued, my voice never wavering despite the chaos beginning to erupt around me, "they've been sharing their real thoughts about me, about our relationship, and about this wedding for the past 3 years." Alex was frantically shaking his head, trying to signal me to stop, but I was just getting started. The truth was pouring out of me like water from a broken dam, and nothing was going to stop it now. "Let me share some of their favorite messages," I said, looking down at my phone while the crowd held its collective breath. "From Leo, the best man, sent just 30 minutes ago. Can't believe he's going through with it, LOL. T-minus 30 minutes until Alex becomes a married millionaire." Leo looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground, his face cycling through shades of red and white. Several guests in the crowd were starting to stand up, trying to get a better view of the unfolding drama, their phones out and recording. From Chris, a groomsman, "Her nose is bigger than my student loan debt, but at least it comes with a trust fund." That's a direct quote from 3 weeks ago. Chris had turned bright red and was staring at his feet, probably wishing he could sink through the floor of the shadow. The crowd's murmur was growing louder, voices mixing in shock and outrage. "But the most interesting messages come from the groom himself," I said, turning to look directly at Alex. His face had gone from confusion to horror to something resembling panic, and I could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool October air. "Alex, would you like to explain to our guests what you meant when you told your friends that our marriage was a strategic merger, not a romance?" The crowd erupted. 400 people were suddenly talking at once, their voices rising in shock and outrage. Some guests were standing up, others were pulling out their phones to record what was happening, and I could hear my name being whispered in a dozen different languages as news of the drama spread through the crowd. "Or perhaps you'd like to clarify your statement that you were planning to give it 3 years max before you're free, with half her family's money and insider access to their government contracts." I continued, my voice cutting through the chaos. Alex was shaking his head violently, his mouth opening and closing without sound like a fish gasping for air. Then, suddenly, the reality of what was happening seemed to hit him all at once. His face crumpled, and a sound escaped him that I had never heard before, a raw, agonized sob that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. It was the sound of a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. "Sofia, please," he managed to choke out between sobs that were growing louder and more desperate. "Please don't do this. I can explain. I love you. I really do love you." But I wasn't finished. 3 years of lies, 3 years of manipulation, 3 years of cruel jokes at my expense, it all demanded a reckoning, and I was going to give it to him in front of everyone who mattered. I have screenshots of hundreds of messages, I announced to the crowd, many of whom were now on their feet and moving closer to get a better view. Messages where Alex complained about having to spend time with my boring immigrant family and their quaint Portuguese customs. Messages where he asked for advice on how to speed up the engagement process because he was getting tired of pretending to be interested in my stories about the family business. Messages where he made bets with his friends about how long he could tolerate being married to me. Alex's sobs were getting louder, more desperate, echoing off the high ceilings of the ceremony space. I had never seen a grown man cry like that, with such complete abandonment of dignity, such raw anguish. The sound of it filled the ceremony space, audible even over the shocked conversations of our guests and the clicking of phone cameras capturing every moment. Here's my personal favorite, I continued, scrolling to one of the most damaging screenshots. From just last week, maybe one kid to really lock in my inheritance rights and make me look like a devoted family man to the courts, then I'm out. The kid can stay with her. I'm not planning to be the family man type long-term. Besides, child support is cheaper than sharing assets. The collective gasp from the crowd was like a physical force. Several of the older Portuguese women in attendance were crossing themselves and muttering prayers, while some of the men were starting to look like they wanted to physically confront Alex. My father was gripping the arm of his chair so tightly his knuckles were white, and my mother was crying not tears of joy, but tears of rage and heartbreak for her daughter. The truth is, I said, my voice cutting through the chaos like a blade, Alex never loved me. He saw me as a business opportunity. A way to access my family's money and connections. He's been planning our divorce since before he proposed, documenting his manipulation of me like it was a game, sharing intimate details of our relationship with his friends for their entertainment. I turned to face the crowd one final time, feeling more powerful and confident than I had ever felt in my life. So no, I will not be marrying Alex today. This wedding is over. The silence that followed was deafening. 400 people sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. Alex was still sobbing, his entire body shaking with the force of his breakdown, completely destroyed by the public exposure of his cruelty. Leo and the other groomsmen looked like they wanted to run, probably calculating how quickly they could escape before facing the consequences of their participation in Alex's scheme. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more surprise for everyone. However, I said, my voice strong and clear, carrying across the silent crowd, this celebration has been paid for. The food has been prepared, the band is ready to play, and you've all traveled here to witness something important. I smiled for the first time since the ceremony began, a real, genuine smile that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The weight of 3 years of deception was lifting off my shoulders, and I felt lighter than air. So please, stay and enjoy the reception. Tonight we're not celebrating a wedding. We're celebrating truth, justice, and the fact that I just dodged the biggest bullet of my life. The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. Applause began to ripple through the audience, starting with my Portuguese relatives who appreciated a good fight and spreading until nearly everyone was clapping. Some people were cheering, others were laughing with relief and admiration, and I could hear several voices shouting brava, in both English and Portuguese. With that, I handed the microphone to the stunned officiant, gathered up my dress, and walked back down the aisle I had just walked up as a bride. But I wasn't the same person who had made that walk 15 minutes earlier. That woman had been naive, trusting, and in love with a lie. The woman walking back down the aisle was free, powerful, and completely in control of her own destiny. As I made my way through the crowd, guests were reaching out to touch my hand, pat my shoulder, and whisper words of support and admiration. My father met me halfway down the aisle, his eyes blazing with pride and fury in equal measure. "Minha filha corajosa," he said in Portuguese, pulling me into a fierce hug. "My brave daughter, you have honored our family name today." My mother was right behind him, tears streaming down her face but her expression fierce and proud. "I have never been more proud of you," she whispered, holding my face in her hands. "You are stronger than I ever imagined." Isabella reached us next, her face glowing with admiration and excitement. "Sofia, that was the most badass thing I have ever seen in my life," she said, her voice filled with awe. "You just became a legend." Behind us, I could still hear Alex's broken sobs, but they were growing fainter as his family and remaining friends tried to comfort him and figure out how to handle the public humiliation he had brought upon himself. I didn't turn around to look. I was done looking backward. The walk back down that aisle was the longest and shortest of my life. Every step felt both eternal and instantaneous, each footfall on the rose-petal-scattered runner marking my transition from victim to victor. The 400 guests were no longer sitting in stunned silence. They were buzzing with excitement, admiration, and disbelief at what they had just witnessed. The reception that followed was unlike anything I could have imagined. Without the pressure of wedding traditions and expectations, it became a real celebration. My Portuguese relatives taught my American friends traditional dances. My father gave an impromptu speech about the importance of truth and integrity that had everyone in tears, and my mother, liberated from the stress of making sure everything was perfect for her daughter's special day, actually relaxed and enjoyed herself for the first time in months. As the evening progressed, I found myself surrounded by love and support from people who valued me for who I actually was, not for what I could provide them. It was a stark contrast to the 3 years I had spent with Alex, always feeling like I had to prove my worth, always sensing that something was slightly off, but never able to put my finger on what it was. Around midnight, as the party was finally winding down, I stood on the terrace of the chateau looking out at the vineyard. The October air was crisp and clean, and the stars were brilliant in the clear sky. I was still wearing my wedding dress, but it no longer felt like a costume or a symbol of broken dreams. It felt like armor, beautiful, powerful armor that had protected me during the most important battle of my life. Isabella joined me on the terrace, both of us slightly tipsy from champagne and adrenaline. "So," she said, "what happens now? What does Sofia Oliveira do for an encore after publicly destroying her cheating fiancé at her own wedding?" I thought about it for a moment, considering all the possibilities that stretched out before me like an open road. For 3 years, my future had been defined by Alex's plans, his timeline, his vision of what our life together would look like. Now, for the first time since I was 26, my future was entirely my own. "I think," I said slowly, "I'm going to take that honeymoon trip to Portugal, not to celebrate a marriage, but to celebrate my heritage and reconnect with my roots. And then I'm going to come back and figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be the perfect girlfriend for someone who never deserved me in the first place." "That sounds perfect," Isabella said, "and if you need a travel companion for that Portugal trip." I laughed, the sound carrying across the vineyard like a promise of better days to come. "I think I can arrange that." As we stood there in comfortable silence, I reflected on the day's events. This morning, I had woken up believing I was about to marry the love of my life. Instead, I had discovered the truth about a man who had spent 3 years lying to me, and I had found the courage to expose that truth in the most public way possible. It wasn't the wedding day I had planned, but it was exactly the wedding day I needed. It was the day I learned that I was stronger than I had ever imagined, braver than I had ever thought possible, and worthy of a love that didn't require me to diminish myself to receive it. The intricate Portuguese braid in my hair, woven with traditions passed down through generations of strong women, felt like a crown. And in that moment, standing in my wedding dress at a reception celebrating my freedom rather than my marriage, I felt like the queen my father had always told me I was. Alex had thought he was marrying into money and status. Instead, he had tried to marry a woman who was worth far more than he could ever comprehend, not because of her family's wealth, but because of her courage, her integrity, and her refusal to accept anything less than the truth. And now, he would have to live with the consequences of underestimating her for the rest of his life.
Sofia, your raw courage in exposing years of manipulation teaches us to trust our instincts when unease lingers in relationships, turning doubt into decisive action and self-empowerment. It's a stark reminder that true strength comes from facing hidden truths head-on. Thank you for sharing. I'm Eliza Quinn, and remember, here on Wedding Day Justice, veils off, justice on.